Rules are made to be broken, right? When there are no more rules or categorisations, when there are no more niggers or whites, or when there's just people, when there's no more punks, when there's no more dirt, that is when things are going to be okay. And like, we'll probably be dead in like 2 years, me and him.
You must be fucking mad wanting more of us.
Look at that, a living circus. If you don't mind, I'm being watched by you know who.
Ready? This one's called No Fun. No fun!
Slowly but surely a little scene evolved. I think it was just raw rock and roll.
We was a rock and roll band, albeit with a difference. We was where the action was.
They were dynamic, they were explosive, they were exciting. At times they were crappy, but they were always exciting and they had energy.
Those guys got better and better after each gig. You know, you'd see a great improvement.
They had attitude, a lot of attitude. They were fun. It was just meant to sort of be a breath of fresh air. And that breath of fresh air has continued for like 30 odd years now. It's really weird how the influences have continued, you know.
The music was dismissed as tuneless racket. Punk rock was here.
There was always a lot of interest in the Sex Pistols from day one. Basically, I think if they weren't musicians, we would have all been like burglars and thieves and criminals, basically, you know.
The day Johnny Rotten goes back on the words he writes in his songs is the day he dies, and I know that for a fact.
It's a different ball game now. It's all over that. It's all over.
I think they're sickening and disgusting. Their clothes, the way they look, their hair, the way they act.
I think they're wonderful. They're 1980s, an expression we need. Our first fashion expression for the 80s.
They were great. If I could only make out the words, they'd be greater.
It's like, whoa, there's a band who actually know about the Stooges here.
It was an important time. It was one big family, believe it or not.
There was this shambolic thing where you really didn't know what was going to happen next with the Pistols live, and it was great.
Johnny was just a loudmouth. He just trying to shock people all the time. He's a very smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He's very calculated.
The Johnny Rotten of today. who lives in Marina del Rey, wealthy, well-to-do expatriate living in Los Angeles. Part of the yacht club, I think, you know.
As soon as Sid was in the band, the balance was all gone, because Sid wanted to outdo his mate John. Paul told me that as soon as he joined the band, Sid started calling John a tosser and all that lot, which John weren't happy about.
Sid wasn't a musician. Sid was a tragedy. Sid was a rock star. Sid was punk rock.
This was the start of the Pistols as Public Enemy #1.
The press love to stick you in boxes. They always have and they always will.
There were a few fights and scuffles in the gigs, and then the violence got maybe blown out of proportion. The media had a big hand in blowing up the hype, and I think they wanted a story. They wanted, the dreadful punk rock, phenomena.
I don't need a Rolls Royce. I don't need a house in the country. I don't need to live in the south of France. I'm happy as I am, and I'm going to carry on.
Finsbury Park with these brown.
Don't live in Finsbury Park.
There was 80 people in a hall that held 2,000. The atmosphere at a Pistols gig was general curiosity, hostility, and a few die-hard punks at the front, and quite a few hostile old hippies.
The most famous place, or the most commercial place they played was in San Francisco, at the Winterland, which became their final date. But that was the most highest profile gig that they did. Everything else was very obscure.
And we need more bands like them. We need more aggressive rock bands. Steve.
Some nights he'd be right on the button and playing and right in with Paul's drums and stuff like that. And other nights he'd be a shambles, but it was still good. It was an experience each time. The album was just so produced. It didn't sound like Old Man Steptoe singing on top of all these sort of layers of guitars and stuff,
I just thought they were spellbinding.
It was never meant to last too long. The idea was to make one record, last for a couple of years, and if all the band members died, I think, yeah, great.
Baby, I won't stop.
A band started to form out of the shop.
I used to hang out with Glenn, Steve and Paul. A couple of times I did a couple of burglaries with Jonesy. You know, we'd break in somewhere and nick a TV set and then sell it for drugs and things like that.
All the gear the Pistols used when they started was as a result of Steve's expeditions. I believe the microphone they used was the same one that Bowie played his last gig as Ziggy Stardust with at Hammersmith Odeon. I think there was a couple of Keith Richards amps in there, and you know, he basically furnished the band with their equipment.
So the music kind of kept us from being sort of hardcore criminals, really, I think, in the end of the day.
Paul was his mate. Paul was like a Shepherd's Bush kid, you know, who happened to be this amazing drummer.
We all used to hang out down Portobello Road on a Saturday and stuff and have a right laugh. I used to see Steve and Paul all the time. They'd be inseparable, like as a couple. And I used to live down Portobello Road, so like my place used to be open house, you know, for like jamming and whatever, you know.
Paul Cook was like the Charlie Watts of punk. He was an immaculate timekeeper and very powerful, and he was locked with Steve.
Steve was, yeah, he's always been really good. He's always had an attitude, you know, yeah.
Steve Jones was a straight-ahead rock and roll guitar player. He was very Pete Townsend meets Johnny Thunders. Very aggressive.
It was a direct reaction to people like the Stones and Yes, who were starting to sort of feel threatened.
Originally, punk rock, as I said, it really wasn't punk rock. We were just rock and roll bands.
There's a lot of people who wanted to do a kind of music which wasn't progressive and wasn't glam, wasn't manufactured, and you didn't have to have a music degree to be able to sort of fit into a band. It's just expression, basically. I mean, people call it from the street, but it was like that, really.
Adults didn't really know about it yet, apart from the fact their kids were starting to look a bit weird with these safety pins, and you know, their hippie hairstyles that people had had for years were suddenly being hacked ruthlessly off.
We played together. We both played with Iggy Pop together, and we sort of cemented a friendship there from the early days. So, yeah, he's the guy I got most in common with. Glenn's always been a wonderful bass player. Maybe a little too tuney, perhaps, for the Pistols, if you like. You know, a bit too much Paul McCartney in there, you know. But he's a songsmith. He's the guy who wrote those riffs.
The epicentre of disaffected London teenage activity was really Malcolm McLaren's sex shop. Glenn Matlock was a kid who was working at the shop, and he played bass, and I think there was one acoustic gig with this lot in a sort of wine bar or something. Steve started trying to sing, and that didn't quite work. They were looking for a singer, and they found Johnny Rotten.
Johnny Rotten, excellent frontman and fantastic lyricist, a modern poet. I don't care if he doesn't like me. A lot of respect for his lyrics, what he had to say, you know.
He was a football hooligan, but also a big fan of a wide variety of music. Someone he liked particularly was Alice Cooper.
Johnny just trying to shock people all the time. And he's very, you know, he's got a weird thing about him, but he's really a regular guy.
He's a funny fucker, you know, he's got the turn of phrase, he's great, yeah. I mean, I don't know why he's bothered doing the celebrity shows and all that, but that's up to him. I mean, he's been with the same lady for donkey's years, Nora.
I've never hit it off with John. To this day, we was a sort of acrimonious relationship. When I saw the Pistols at the 100 Club, I met a woman called Nora, who was 18, and I went out with her for about 6 months, and she ended up marrying John years later. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons, you know, I was one of the first guys she went out with on the punk rock scene. Later I saw him at the Greek Theatre a couple of years ago, and I hadn't seen Nora in like maybe 25 years, and someone sort of tapped her on the shoulder backstage, and, oh, hi, Nora. She turned around, oh, hi, Steve. I haven't seen you in like, you know, like must be 25 years. She's like, hey, John, look who's here, it's Steve. And like, John just took one look at me and was like, came walking over, and I went, hey, John, hi, do you remember me? And he kind of pushed me and like kind of went, oh, now everybody wants to be my best friend, you know. And I said, hey, John, I didn't say I wanted to be your friend. I said, do you remember me? You know, then he had all his Irish, you know, entourage with him. It was like fists and like we were going to go for it. I was like, I don't think so. I was with like one friend, and I said, hey, don't worry. And we walked away. But
John kind of, over the years, has developed this Kenneth Williams pantomime dame, but cuttingly vitriolic stand-up comedian persona, and just doing what he likes. I mean, he won't be ordered around by anyone, including me. The other week I saw him at the Mojo Awards, and it was my job to ask him to pose for a photo with Neil Diamond, and he exploded at me. And I'm not posing with that orange-tanned bastard and all this sort of stuff. He's still got this spark, but he plays with it now. John's long been aware of his position, power and reputation. McLaren liked the way that he looked, and he was looking for a singer for this nascent band that was struggling to get an identity, and said, well, sing along to the jukebox, because there was a big old jukebox in the corner, and he put on Schools Out by Alice Cooper, and suddenly it looked like someone had stuck an electric bolt up his arse, and he sort of started jiggling around and singing Schools Out, wailing, and he said, right, you're in the band. Malcolm was quite involved with the New York Dolls in '74. Having destroyed them, he returned to London.
he hung around the New York Dolls. He claims he was their manager, but I know the guys from the Dolls. I mean, if you ask David Johansen, he said Malcolm was never our manager, he was our haberdasher.
At first, they were wearing clothes out of Malcolm's shop because they were all very poor and they could get them for nothing, although he probably took it out of their wages or something. Basically, they were a walking advert for Malcolm's shop.
No one could afford to buy Malcolm McLaren's clothes, because even in those days, you know, back in 1976, 77, they cost like 200, 300 quid, whereas the kids could make it themselves out of ripped bin liners and whatever, just expressing themselves. You know.
What's your dress made from? Plastic bin liner.
McLaren got the Pistols together to flog his clothes, basically, he had no idea where it was going to lead to. The talent was Vivian.
You got to give him his credit. I think he helped them. You know, he got them in the rehearsal studio. They wrote the songs, though. I think it might have happened with or without him. I don't think he was responsible for as much as he makes out. He likes to say he's responsible for everything he created. I don't subscribe to that reality.
I hate the guy. I think he's a jerk, big jerk. Yeah, a jerk who got lucky. It's just one of these people. There's always a prat involved somewhere.
How do you react to your group's reputation as being the most revolting in the country?
I find it very amusing.
And yet it's said that you're sick on stage, you spit at the audience and so on. I mean, how can this be a good example to children?
Well, people are sick everywhere. People are sick and fed up of this country, telling them what to do.
But not getting paid for it.
Pardon?
But not getting paid for putting on that sort of public show.
Well, nor are we.
In 1976, the first half was spent getting better playing gigs, doing places like the Marquee, getting into fights with the audience, because they were getting heckled a lot. I mean, they were unlike anything around. They were opposing everything that had gone before. There were hardly any people at their first gig. If as many people who claimed to have been there had been, you know, these gigs would have been, you know, double packed.
So the first time I saw the Sex Pistols live was at the Marquee Club when they supported Eddie and the Hot Rods. And so it started out as a little scene, 50 people, 100 people. They did rehearse very hard, they worked very hard. Good musicians, you know.
The Pistols came with that. They had that Chuck Berry element, they had the Kinks, they had the Who, they had Eddie Cochran, they had all those elements. They brought into like a garage form, and they related to, they almost were like the Stooges, MC5, and sort of like the New York Dolls.
We did our first gig at the 100 Club supporting the Pistols. The Pistols kind of had their own fan club, if you like, which was called the Bromley Contingent. And they looked on the Damned as maybe a threat towards the Pistols, I got the feeling. And there's a bunch of kids there which had no allegiance with anyone. It was like the first time we played, and for them kids, probably the first time they'd seen the Pistols. And they really had a good time, and it was really encouraging. We're always grateful for the Pistols for, or you know, begrudgingly to Malcolm for giving us our first gigs. We were getting paid a £5 for the gig, £5, right, in those days, right, for doing the support gig. But Malcolm, knowing how much we're getting paid, charged us 20 quid for use of PA and lights. That goes to show you how much anarchy there was in Malcolm's heart.
Attacking Top of the Pops and the sort of bands that are on there. What do you think they're relevant to the kids 16, 17?
Of course they're not. Relevant to their mums and dads, but that's about all.
What about bands like Rod Stewart?
What about him?
Mums and dads, yeah. He's all round, isn't he? All round entertainment.
He's an old. Don't accept the old order. Get rid of it.
What do you think about bands like the Stones?
I don't. I don't even consider them a band, they're more like a business.
Before, when they had the Stones and the Who and they came along, And they thought they were great because they destroyed everything that went before them. But now they can't take it because we're destroying everything that's gone before us.
It's not violence, it's just excitement causes it most of the time, you know. When we're playing, people get excited and worked up.
That's because people aren't even used to people standing up and jumping around. They just want them to sit down all the time. And as soon as anything other than that happens, they get really kind of shocked.
It's considered violent.
Yeah, it's if someone stands up there and goes, yeah, it's...
They go, look, he's starting, go on, get him out.
The usual.
We got the front page of the Melody Maker, you know, for supposedly having a punch-up when we was actually trying to stop a fight.
I think there was a lot of exaggeration. There were a few fights and scuffles.